business turns left, and we have no dumbest bill in America, but don't be upset because we have lots of dumbest bills coming up in next episodes because all of the legislatures, for the most part, and of course Congress, are starting up new, so there'll be plenty of dumb bills to come. We promise. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our assistant producer, and I want to thank everyone for listening. This podcast is called Big Business Turns Left. And so, why are they turning left? Well, here's a WSJ Wall Street Journal Big Business Opinion report. It's a piece from Kimberly Strassel. It's entitled Big Business's Sharp Left Turn. I'm just going to read a little bit of this for you first before we go into it. It says, corporate America took a big step this week, moving the captives of wokeness to active accomplices. The legal and political consequences may prove profound. Big business over the past 4 years has increasingly signed up for leftist politics. Some of this was woke washing, peddling causes or figures for brand benefit. Think Nike's Colin Kaepernick's commercial or Lacoste's replacement of its crocodile logo with endangered species. Some was spinelessness, caving into the liberal mob. Think Goldman Sachs' refusal to finance fossil fuel projects. Some was strategic, Twitter and Facebook attempting to ward off regulation with ever-changing policies on misinformation. But the events of last week, the assault on the Capitol and the Democrat Senate takeover, inspired corporate America to take on a new role. Business titans are positioning themselves as arbiters of political speech and activity by withholding essential services to conservative individuals, companies, and groups. They've turned themselves into political entities, raising constitutional and antitrust questions. This goes way beyond big tech's censoring of Donald Trump and Parler and Twitter and Facebook and Apple. Google and Amazon entered into the fray by deploying a bogus rationale for banning the president from the biggest social media sites, then dismantling the only effective conservative alternative. This alone raises free speech concerns. So she goes on to talk about all of the different corporate wokeness platforms and companies that are basically trying to, limit speech, of course, but also to try to stop conservatives from even being paid by companies who would normally pay them or carry their products. Really weird stuff, right? So here's an example. So Lowe's canceled an upcoming fundraiser for Josh Hawley. And that was because, of course, of the fact that Josh Hawley had engaged in he was an objector in Congress, in the United States Senate. He was an objector to the election and objected to the electors being assigned to, of course, Joe Biden in certain states. And so therefore, Lowe's is saying, you know what? You were going to have your fundraiser at our hotel, but now we're not going to allow you to do that. In fact, we're going to ban you from having any fundraisers from this hotel from this point forward. Now that is the ultimate in corporate wokeness. And of course, so why are companies moving left? Why? I mean, what is their benefit? So here's an example. Business Insider, this was just printed just a few days ago. It says Walmart, Amazon, and other U.S. corporate giants cut off donations to Republican lawmakers who opposed Biden's certification as president. Walmart will halt political donations to lawmakers that opposed certifying the president-elect Joe Biden's victory. It joins Amazon, Morgan Stanley, Dow, and AT&T in deciding to cut funding to specific Republicans. Separately, JP Morgan, Citibank, Microsoft, and Facebook said they will temporarily pause all political donations to both Republicans and Democrats. Last week, 147 Republican lawmakers voted against certifying President-elect Joe Biden's election win. And of course, then all the companies that we just read off to you decided, you know what? We're not going to give those individuals any donations. And we're also going to try to maybe ban them from our platforms. We're going to try to stop them from promoting their books or stop them from promoting their points of view. So big business has turned sharply left. And Mike Lindell, he's the My Pillow guy, right? And we've talked about Mike Lindell before. He seems like an incredibly likable guy. He has those commercials that you see all of the time on many different news channels. Mike Lindell said that Bed Bath & Beyond and Kohl's have canceled his MyPillow products in their stores. So you can't buy the MyPillow products anymore in Bed Bath & Beyond and Kohl's. Now, why is that? Well, because, of course, Mike Lindell supports Donald Trump and supported Donald Trump all the way to the end. In fact, including when Mike Lindell believed that a number of states had engaged in election irregularities at a very large scale level, and therefore he believes the election was unfair. So that's Mike Lindell. So what do these corporate titans do? They're saying, well, we're not going to carry your product anymore. I mean, this is incredible. Marriott suspends donations to Republican objectors as well. The PGA Tour removes the Trump golf course from their tour. So you're not going to be able to see a PGA Tour at any of Trump's courses. And then, it's just, we go on and on and on. And that's big business, of course. They're turning left. And here's my opinion about this. Here's my commentary about why big business is turning left. It's all about sales, right? They believe that the people who are on the conservative side of the aisle will still buy their products no matter what. They feel like you will still go to Bed Bath & Beyond, you will still go to Kohl's, and you'll still go to Lowe's, and you'll go to, NBA. You'll go to the NBA and watch them play. I mean, you'll do all of these different things. You'll still watch the PGA Tour. They're banking on the fact that conservatives aren't going to change their spending habits. And at the same time, they're banking on the fact that Democrats and progressives will change their spending habits and engage those corporations. But does anyone out there in podcast land have any idea how dangerous this is? How dangerous is it that private corporations are trying to censor free speech and they're trying to essentially bankrupt conservatives? Conservative businessmen, they're trying to bankrupt them by not carrying their products. And they're trying to also bankrupt any kind of conservative voice on any of their platforms. It's very, very unsettling, to say the least, especially since we have the United States Congress, both houses under control of Democrats, and the presidency, because I don't see this getting any better anytime soon. And this is going to be an epic battle, in my opinion, for the next 4 years. And if you want any more proof of that, Mayor Lori Lightfoot, she's the mayor of Chicago. She's the one that's had her foot on the neck of the economy in the city of Chicago. Now that Joe Biden is just about to be inaugurated, right? I mean, that's happening, of course, in 24 hours. Now that that's going to be happening, Mayor Lori Lightfoot has decided she wants to open up the economy. And so, wait a minute. No wonder big business is turning left, because the woke politicians like Lori Lightfoot have shut down small businesses and medium-sized businesses. She's trying to get them to basically, beg to open up their businesses. But now everybody can open up just about in Chicago. And we have a really short clip of her. And you have to ask yourself, well, what has changed, right? I thought in the wintertime, COVID was supposed to be absolutely rabid, because in the cold weather, it was supposed to be more, more likely that you could get COVID, but apparently that's not the case, according to Lori Lightfoot. So we have a clip on that, and here it is.
We are very close to a point where we should be talking about opening up our bars and restaurants.
So we're very close. Now, she said that just a few days ago, but of course, what happens tomorrow? Joe Biden gets inaugurated. So, as she said, does anyone out there in podcast land think this is just a little bit weird that the mayor of Chicago would suddenly say in the really cold month of January, in Chicago, it's of course absolutely freezing in the wintertime, and COVID is rampant during the wintertime. But now, of course, it's okay. We want restaurants and bars to open, but she also says we want she uses that pronoun. We want our bars and restaurants to open. I'm just sorry, Mayor Lightfoot, I have a problem with that. They're not our bars and restaurants. They actually belong to people who own them and who have, sacrificed everything to open up these small businesses. So they're not our restaurants and bars. It belongs to people who have worked really hard to create these bars and restaurants. So that is big business turns left. So next up, podcast listeners, AOC wants a ministry of truth. That's right. Good old Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wants a ministry of truth in the United States. Now, to be fair, she doesn't actually use the term ministry of truth directly from George Orwell's 1984. But if you listen to her in this clip, it sounds a lot like the Ministry of Truth, and we have it, and here it is.
But what I can say is that there's absolutely a commission that's being discussed, but it seems to be more investigatory in style rather than truth and reconciliation. And so I think that's an interesting concept for us to explore. And, you know, I do think that several members of Congress in some of my discussions have brought up media literacy because that is a part of what happened here. And we're going to have to figure out how we rein in our media environment so that you can't just spew disinformation and misinformation. It's one thing to have differing opinions, but it's another thing entirely to just say things that are false.
So that is AOC, who wants the Ministry of Truth. So she's talking about media literacy. So here's what's interesting. If you're on the right side of the aisle, you would probably agree that there should be media literacy, namely good journalism. And good journalism includes good investigative journalism. So a good journalist would actually not just report the story, what happened, but also would give you some historical context as to what has happened in the past about that story. And that would be helpful when you write an article. Of course, any kind of historical context in a story is not really available anymore because journalism, of course, is all about clickbait, really. I mean, that's really what's happened. So if you're on the left, media literacy means, well, we need to teach you not how to write. We want to teach you what to write. We want you to write a certain way and write only about certain individuals and only about certain individuals. And, you know, obviously think a certain way. But AOC doesn't stop there. She also talks about reining in our media environment, reining in our media environment. So that means, of course, she wants to rein in Fox News, Newsmax, OAN, or, of course, any kind of social media platform. She wants to make sure that anyone on one side of the aisle doesn't really have a place to go to either listen to news or to be able to learn about what's going on in the world. And then she basically says in this clip, directly says, we need to not have false information out there. So who decides, podcast listeners, who decides what is false? Who decides what is true? Well, therein lies why we're calling this clip AOC Wants a Ministry of Truth, because AOC is suggesting that someone will be in charge in the government of deciding what is true and false, and therefore you have some sort of disclaimer at the bottom of the article or at the end of the video saying, we fact-checked this and it's not true. Do you really believe that you want government to be able to engage in that kind of nonsense? Yet, of course, that's exactly what has been happening. So that's AOC Wants Ministry of Truth. So podcast listeners, silencing dissent. So if you think it's bad enough that AOC wants a Ministry of Truth, Chris Wallace interviewed just recently Tim Cook. Tim Cook is the CEO of Apple. And Tim Cook is talking to Chris Wallace about what they did with respect to banning Parler from their platform. And it's really kind of interesting. We have a series of clips on this. You really should listen to them. It's worth listening to. It's kind of fantastic to listen to because it really gets at the center of this private company, this mammoth private company, censoring the debate. And Tim Cook says big tech isn't monolithic. So first up, here's that clip. Listen to it.
Big tech is not monolithic. There's several companies, they do different things. For us, we're always trying to do the right thing.
Cook decided the right thing for Apple was to suspend the conservative-leaning social media platform Parler from its App Store due to some users' violent posts.
So that's Chris Wallace saying that Tim Cook is the power player of the week. And if you know anything about Chris Wallace, of course, he does this every single week. He has a power player of the week. And Tim Cook is that power player. Fair enough. I mean, he runs a company with a $1 trillion plus market capitalization. It's a behemoth of a company, right? No doubt about that. But Tim Cook says big tech isn't monolithic. So here's Chris Wallace asking Cook about restricting speech. And we're going to go into this in some detail. And it's kind of interesting, not just what Chris Wallace asks, but what he doesn't ask in this entire interview. We have that clip in. Here it is.
Isn't big tech restricting speech?
We have an app store that has about 2 million apps in it, and we have terms of service for these apps. We obviously don't control what's on the internet, but we've never viewed that our platform should be a simple replication of the internet. We have rules and regulations, and we just ask that people abide by those.
So that's Cook saying, look, we have terms of service and we have rules and regulations, and you have to follow them. And if you don't follow them, we can deplatform you. And he also said that he did not deplatform Parler permanently. They're not permanently banned. What Tim Cook is saying is they have been suspended. So they've been suspended. They must negotiate with Apple to get back in their good graces so that they can, talk about the correct kind of speech. There's only one kind of speech that Apple really wants to allow. And nonetheless, it is indeed a fact that Apple is a private company, and they do have the right to have a terms of service and to enforce those terms of service. That is true, podcast listeners. But what about free speech, right? What about that whole idea of free speech when you have such a mammoth company with so much clout that they kind of are a de facto utility? And we've talked about that kind of de facto utility before. So what is utility? Well, think of the electric company, right? You have an electric company. How many choices do you have for your electric company? Probably one, right? Probably just one choice, because you don't want 10 different electric companies running 10 different kinds of telephone poles and lines to all these different houses. It would be a complete disaster. There's one electric company, and they are utility, and they are rightly regulated, because if they weren't, they could charge you whatever they wanted to charge you for electricity. Well, now we have Apple. Apple is this massive company, and Apple pretty much controls a great deal of how you can get on various platforms, right? It's very easy to go on your iPhone and to choose one of, the apps on your iPhone and go somewhere. You go in that direction, whatever particular app you want to choose. Well, what if the Parler app isn't there? Now where do you go, right? In theory, you go to Parler's website. Well, we're going to talk about that in a minute. So what about free speech? Well, we have that clip as well with Cook, and here it is.
How did you decide to balance free speech with objectionable content?
We looked at the incitement to violence that was on there. And we don't consider that free speech and incitement to violence has an intersection.
What about the argument that by taking Parler off Apple, in addition to what other companies are doing, that you're just driving these people, these views further underground?
Well, we've only suspended them, Chris. And so if they get their moderation together, they would be back on there.
So look, there's no doubt that, of course, there are people who are on Parler and people on Facebook and Twitter who incite violence, right? And there should be someone to make sure that that kind of incitement is at least looked at very closely. Okay, so we have to be careful about this, right? Because then we have to argue over, well, what is actual incitement? Well, it's fair to say that incitement would be, hey, everybody go to the Capitol and storm it and break in and, tear Nancy Pelosi's office apart, steal her laptop, and if we have to kill a couple policemen on the way inside the Capitol, then let's do it. If someone were to say that, clearly that is incitement to violence. Let's all agree with that, right? But here we have this massive $1 trillion company deciding what is incitement. And so I'm sure that conversation is happening in the back channels now between the CEO of Parler and Tim Cook's people as to, well, okay, so what is acceptable by Apple? What does Apple consider to be acceptable? And just so the podcast listeners understand, so this doesn't come back to haunt us here at Mark and the Millennials, we don't think that incitement of violence is a good idea either, okay? Obviously, really, we don't, okay? So don't come back and say, oh, Mark Fisher said blah, blah, blah. No, we didn't say that. What we're saying is that there are clear issues of incitement, but then you have these large companies deciding what is and what isn't inciting violence. And so here's my question. Why didn't Chris Wallace ask Tim Cook the simple question, well, what about collusion with Apple, right? I mean, we have Amazon, who has large server farms, right? These are the farms that, if you will, they're inside of massive warehouses, and they store all of the data, not all of the data, but much of the data that is stored in the United States that you call up when you go online. It's stored on Amazon servers. Well, guess who had stored their data on Amazon servers? Parler did. And so Amazon, of course, deplatformed, if you will, and kicked Parler off of their servers. And then Google, of course, did the same thing, with Android, with the Android device. So now you can't go and with the Android device, you cannot have that as an alternative phone to an iPhone and go on it and do what? You can't go have an app for Parler on the Android. So you also, I think also, Parler was deplatformed from their website because of the same thing, right? Because obviously the website data is stored somewhere in some cloud, in some place, and that was Amazon as well. So Parler is gone, right? It's like Parler didn't ever even exist. Yet all of these huge mega tech companies they banned Parler at the same time. So isn't that collusion? That's my question. Isn't that collusion? So here's where we're going with this. Why didn't Chris Wallace ask the question to Tim Cook? Isn't it collusion, Tim Cook, that you and Amazon and Google happen to deplatform Parler all at the same time? Isn't that collusion? But he didn't ask the question. And this is what drives me crazy, because there are always these soft interviews. How often do you get Tim Cook in a studio or on Zoom, same difference, in an interview where you have an opportunity at this critical time in American history to ask the difficult questions about deplatforming and free speech and what is considered incitement and who's policing it and who decides? All these are good questions. But of course, you can always count on Chris Wallace never asking the tough questions like collusion, because then that would get the Justice Department involved, because the whole purpose of collusion by Tim Cook and by Amazon, Jeff Bezos, and Google and so forth is to gang up together to stop any kind of competition whatsoever. Same thing with Mark Zuckerberg. I mean, we didn't name Mark Zuckerberg here, but we might as well. And speaking of which, what did Zuckerberg do? What's my understanding that Zuckerberg's Facebook is working with Turkey to decide what is or isn't acceptable in the country of Turkey in terms of speech on their platform. So it's the government colluding with Facebook and deciding what is or isn't acceptable. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the problem, right? Because on the left, they're saying, oh, these are private companies. They can police their platforms any way they want. Yeah, but they can't collude. Okay? You know what else they can't do? They can't be in partnership with the United States government. They can't be in partnership with the United States government to stop any kind of speech they want, because they're doing business with the government. And yet Facebook has shown us that they have a model where they're actually doing that, and they're doing it in Turkey. And so that's silencing dissent. So next up, podcast listeners, we have Parler CEO talks censorship. So Parler CEO John Matsy, I believe that's how you say his name, he talks about censorship and where Parler is, because they have been deplatformed. And we have a clip on that. We're going to talk about this at great length. And here it is.
Google, Apple, and Amazon Web Services all agreed that our terms of service were acceptable. They never said publicly or anywhere, as far as I'm aware, that there was any problems with our terms of service and free speech.
So that is the case. So Parler was never really given a notice that what they were doing was inappropriate or improper. They were just wholesale deplatformed, right? So imagine that. Imagine being someone who has built up this business, and the assumption is that your company's servers and their website and their app, they're all good to go. And if there is an issue with the terms of service with Apple or with Amazon servers, then these companies, most companies would give you a warning because you are spending money with the company, right? It's not like you're getting these services for free, but instead the companies, Amazon, and of course, Facebook, and of course, Apple, they've all decided we're just going to cut you off completely and utterly. So Maria Bartiromo was discussing this very issue with Rick Grinnell. And this is important because it's a terrific interview. And Maria Bartiromo talks about German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who had her own comments about censorship in the United States. And she talks to Rick Grinnell about this. It's actually pretty fascinating and funny at the same time, and scary. And we had that clip, and here it is.
In Germany, because this week we actually heard from Angela Merkel, who commented on the fact that President Trump was banned from Twitter. Now, there are reports this morning. Here is the German chancellor's statement saying, bear great responsibility for political communications not being poisoned by hatred, by lies, and by incitement to violence. This fundamental right can be intervened. And she's saying that this is just bad policy according to the law and within the framework defined by legislators, not according to a decision by the management of social media platforms. This is an attack on free speech. Rick, your reaction to what we're seeing in terms of cancel culture, Twitter. We have a tape of Jack Dorsey saying this is just one account, but this is going to be going on for a long time. And we are seeing lots of Republicans, conservatives' Twitter accounts being purged.
So that's Maria Bartiromo asking Rick Grinnell the question about censorship, but also quoting Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, who basically said, Angela Merkel said, well, it's the job of legislators to decide what you should be able to hear and see, not the decision of these large companies. I mean, talk about night and day from the United States, right? We're saying, well, these large companies can do what they want to do, but they shouldn't be able to collude. And if they're utilities, then they need to be regulated. Angela Merkel's saying, oh no, it's really the government's decision to decide what you see or don't see. And I think that's kind of fascinating. And we have Rick Grinnell's response to Maria Bartiromo's question to him. Pretty fascinating, and here it is.
Look, I hope that the Democrats and the Washington, D.C. media and big tech in Silicon Valley, and specifically Twitter and Jack Dorsey, I hope they're all watching and they see what they've done. We now have Germany lecturing us on our form of government, on how we are going after free speech.
So we're being schooled by Germany about free speech of all countries, right? Of all countries. We have to listen to what Angela Merkel of Germany is telling us of what people should or shouldn't be able to hear or say, and that government is going to make that decision of what people do or don't see or say. And we gave this example earlier about how Facebook bows to a country's demand and will facilitate government censorship. I just want to read this to you real quickly from the Western Journal. It says, Facebook announced Monday it has begun the process of assigning a legal entity in Turkey to comply with a controversial law governing social media companies. The law, which passed in July, requires social media companies such as Facebook and Twitter to maintain representatives in Turkey to deal with complaints about content on their platforms. By the way, the complaints will be from the government. The complaints aren't from individuals. It'll be from the government. So if, of course, Turkey doesn't like what they're seeing on Facebook, then they're going to clearly go after Facebook and say, you need to take these down because, they don't meet government standards. So Angela Merkel's saying the same thing. She wants the tech companies to collude with the government and to be able to control the speech. This is so dangerous, right? So we have two dangers at the same time. Mammoth companies that are in the tech space who have way too much power and authority and control too much of the information, and a government that in the United States, that if it were corrupt, like a Biden administration, could collude with those mammoth tech companies and then move forward and completely and utterly shut down free speech. So you want to hear an example, podcast listeners, of free speech that, is kind of an incitement to violence, but hasn't been taken down yet? So Alec Baldwin, the actor, said he dreams of Donald Trump hanging. He dreams of Donald Trump hanging. It's almost hard to say because that's what Alec Baldwin said in his tweet. And I want to read it to you. So here is from Alec Baldwin, his own words in Twitter. I had a dream Trump was on trial for sedition. And outside the courthouse, a noose was hung from a makeshift scaffold. The noose was made of recycled COVID masks. And it goes on. I had a dream Trump was on trial for sedition, and outside the courthouse, a noose was hung from a makeshift scaffold. The noose was made of recycled COVID masks. And, a couple people put, sometimes dreams can come true. And you look at this, podcast listeners, and you say to yourself, why is this still up on Twitter? If you want to know, in part, right? If you want to know in part why there are so many millions of people that are upset about this election and about the conduct of these actors and actresses and far left big businesses and so many others in the culture, the way they have conducted themselves in attacking Donald Trump on social media and saying things like dreaming that he would be hung. And then they're not deplatformed, or they're not given a warning, or there isn't that little warning up there that says, oh, caution readers, we think this might be, offensive to you. And therefore, it sounds to me like it's kind of sort of inciting violence, which is what the left is talking about constantly. And that's exactly what it's doing. And of course, Alec Baldwin, his tweet is still up. And Twitter has not banned him, or Twitter has not suspended him. No, nothing like that. And so we have a real problem, don't we? We have big tech that is way too powerful. We have a government that is corrupt and that is all too willing to cooperate with big tech to help them censor as much language as they can, language that, of course, they don't agree with. And then we have the crazies on the left that are still on the platform inciting violence. And you wonder why the country is divided. Okay, and that is Parler CEO talks censorship. So next up, we have shadow presidency. Yeah, you heard that right. So next up, podcast listeners, we have the shadow presidency. Is this really Barack Obama's third term? Well, you make your own decision, and I'll tell you what I think about that in a moment. So we have Maria Bartiromo. She interviews Richard Grinnell. And Bartiromo asks about Susan Rice. She says, what role will Susan Rice play in a Biden administration? We have a series of clips on this. And here's the first clip. Here it is.
Susan Rice has been tapped to do domestic policy. And what is really interesting about that is she's got no experience in domestic policy. She is going to be somebody who is incredibly influential. Remember that she was National Security Advisor, so she knows that entire apparatus. We were told that she wanted to be Secretary of State in the Obama administration. They were making moves towards that, but she didn't have the votes, so they backed off on that. And so I think the reality is she's going to be running foreign policy, domestic policy. She's probably extremely happy that Kamala Harris is going to be preoccupied with the Senate, trying to manage 50-50, being the 101st senator there, and won't have a lot of time to get into policy issues. So I think you need to watch Susan Rice very closely. She will be the shadow president. We have a president-elect in Joe Biden who clearly is not the Joe Biden of 10 years ago.
Yeah, he's clearly not the Joe Biden of 10 years ago, you think? Who was Barack Obama's closest associate and closest confidant during his presidency? Susan Rice. And who is going to be the inside advisor for all things and all policy domestic and all policies foreign and international to the Biden administration? Susan Rice. But she's not going to be the Secretary of State, of course, because she couldn't get actually confirmed in the United States Senate, even with the control by the Democrats. surprisingly, because if she were to go in front of the committee in the United States Senate to be confirmed as Secretary of State, the Republicans would disclose all of the corruption that she was engaged in during the Obama administration. And that would all have to come out. It would come out publicly, and she would then be required to answer it in public, in a public forum. So the Biden administration decided, well, Barack Obama wants to run this administration. So since we can't give Susan Rice the job of Secretary of State, let's give Susan Rice the job instead of Biden administration's and Joe Biden's domestic policy czar and international policy czar. So that's what she's going to be doing. And so you make your own decision. Will Obama really be in charge of this administration with a Joe Biden that is just a fraction of himself and a Kamala Harris who's going to be preoccupied voting in the Senate because she's going to be breaking the tie vote since it's an even split. And so she's going to be spending a lot of time in the Senate doing that and not actually involved in day-to-day operations of the White House, needless to say. And that's kind of frightening. And so Barack Obama's gotten exactly what he wants. But don't worry, because Rick Grinnell talks about the treasure trove of documents that are going to be declassified today and tomorrow. Kind of important stuff. We have that clip, and here it is.
We're going to see a whole treasure trove of documents that really show that the Russian collusion investigation from the very beginning, when you look at the dates of the early warning signs, you will see that career officials knew exactly that this was a phony investigation, that it was politically motivated. Those voices are in the documents. Unfortunately, what we've had are political appointees during the Obama years who took those warning signs and classified them away. That's kind of the trick that they do. They overclassify anything that they don't like. The narrative that doesn't fit their narrative immediately becomes classified. It's a trickery of what the intelligence community can do. So then you have to go into this fight. If you want transparency, if you want the truth to come out, then we must demand that documents that do not push forward or reveal any sources or any methods on how we developed these sources or this information. If it doesn't have a source or a method, then it should be declassified, especially in probes like the Russian collusion investigation.
Yeah. So the Russian collusion investigation, of course, there are, of course, a trove of documents, according to Grinnell, that are going to be declassified today and tomorrow. Of course, we're talking about the last 2 days of the Trump presidency, and he's going to declassify as many of these as he can to impose the maximum amount of pain on a Biden presidency. And that's why, of course, Susan Rice doesn't want to be confirmed by the United States Senate, because a lot of these documents that are going to be declassified are going to have information about her involvement in the Russian collusion scandal, which ended up being completely and utterly manufactured, and she was front and center in that scandal. And so Grinnell goes on to continue to talk about those treasure trove of documents. And this is important because a Biden presidency, look, I don't want Joe Biden to succeed on policy matters, okay? Do I want the United States economy to bounce back? Yes, I do. But I don't want it to bounce back with Democrat policies of having their foot on the neck of the business community as they have through COVID. And I don't want the Joe Biden policies to succeed because his policies are about destroying the United States of America. And we know this because he would never choose Susan Rice as his closest advisor, who is a Barack Obama confidant, the same Barack Obama who believed in the Constitution of the United States one day and then gets out of office and tells us what he really thinks, which he wants to get rid of the Electoral College. He wants to pack the court. He wants to bring in 2 new states. One of them is a federal city, which of course is not against the Constitution. And he wants to get rid of the United States Senate at the same time and have them elected or apportioned in accordance with the states. So he doesn't really want any kind of check and balance system in the United States. And his girl, Susan Rice, is in there taking over. So here's the final clip of this series, and it's the treasure trove of documents, according to Rick Grinnell, and here it is.
Congress has done a decent job of demanding documents. Unfortunately, it's a partisan exercise when the Trump administration was in, it was largely just Democrats pushing for more information. And it will be the reverse in the Biden administration. Republicans will start asking for more information. I think that's an appropriate role, but both parties need to recognize that they shouldn't protect bureaucrats or political appointees who are trying to hide information. This treasure trove of documents that we're talking about, that we're hoping to see, is really an important part of seeing the scandals of the past come forward with information that is about the truth. We're seeking the truth, and those in Washington who keep hiding it are really the problem.
Yes, and so there's a treasure trove of documents, and we've said this a number of times. Trump is going to release those documents. He's going to declassify them. We are going to see them. We're going to see who the actors were who tried to completely and utterly destroy the Trump presidency. And you can see that, they were in part successful because Donald Trump did not get reelected. And they basically made his first 3 years in office a nightmare, because the first 3 years there was Russia collusion. And then, of course, right during a pandemic, they decide to impeach him. And then he loses the presidency. And then after the election, they decide to impeach him a second time. And so if you wonder why, podcast listeners, why the Trump supporters, the 74 million Trump supporters, are so upset with this election, and why they find it so hard to believe that Joe Biden won, and why they find it so hard to believe that, we have a Democrat president who is going to come in and act like he's going to save the day and unite the country after what they did for the past 4 years. Those 74 million people are upset, and they have every right to be upset. Okay, they don't have a right to storm the Capitol. They don't have a right to break into the Capitol. So we want to make that crystal clear, right? But they have every right to be there and to be upset and to be and to demonstrate and to talk to the media and to tell them this is something that we're not happy about. So you can expect during this last day and a half or two of the Donald Trump presidency that this treasure trove of documents is going to be very damaging to Barack Obama, to Susan Rice, to Joe Biden, and to many other members of Congress who engaged in these lies for 3 years that not just, I think, mortally damaged a president and his ability to get it reelected, but in addition, and also govern effectively, but in addition to that, really hurt the United States of America, because Democrats don't care how much they hurt the country as long as they're in charge. And they demonstrated that for 3+ years until the impeachment, and then with COVID by trying to basically say that Donald Trump didn't do his job. And meanwhile, of course, the country's being vaccinated in large part because Donald Trump is making sure that we have vaccinations in place, and that one was actually invented by creating this consortium of companies that competed with each other. And they competed with each other because they knew they had a guaranteed customer, and that was the United States government that would buy the vaccine for every single American who wanted it. And that is the shadow presidency. It's really Obama's third term, without question. And that's it from Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you for joining us. I want to thank Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, hopefully Parler soon again, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.